and welcome back to Nelson All Over Cards. Today, Villain Theory is back with video number 5 in our deck building series. How are you doing, Villain Theory?
Yeah, I'm doing good, doing good. Can't believe it's episode 5 already.
Yeah, right. We just had the discussion. I was like, wait, what episode is it? And then we settled on 5, and so if it's not 5, we may have two fives, and that's fine. But today we are talking all about deck size and number of cards you should include of each type. So, should we be running towards the 40 size deck, the 50 card deck, and then also like how many allies, how many events, how many resources, etc., should we be running in a Marvel Champions deck? Now, we will be referencing previous videos. We've done 4 other of these videos. We will be referencing those. Those will be linked down below. And if you have any questions or if you have not watched those, I recommend you watch those first before you dive into this one. All that being said, how are you doing, Villain Theory?
Yes, doing really good, really excited.
Yeah, yeah. I saw that there was on the Discord we have a deck sharing feature where people can post decks and we can talk about the decks. And I saw right before I logged on that some chaotic crazy person posted a 50 card Star Lord deck.
What? Well, that is insane. 50 cards?
50 cards. Can you do that?
I feel like we'll have to talk about that.
Yeah. Let's just kind of talk about it because in I think standard card game theory, the less cards, the better. And so I see a lot of people really not ever exceeding that 40 card deck size cap because less cards, you're going to hit your better card sooner, right? So
hmm
talk to me about why, one, do you think that they provided this range? You can go 40 to 50 cards. And obviously, you're posting decks with more than 40 cards. Why would you ever want to run a deck with more than 40 cards? Let's just start the conversation there, or I guess wherever you want to
Okay.
start it.
No, that's good. I mean, I think one of the reasons they probably did 40 to 15, I've never specifically, given it a great deal of thought, but I think it offers a level of flexibility. If I build a deck in like another game, let's say Arkham, I've got a set number I'm aiming for. And, sometimes I've got this one card, I'm like, oh, I wish I could fit this in, or, maybe I'm struggling to get to the limit. And I think it's, just easier, if people can just, have a bit of flexibility there, which is probably why I expect they did it. But there is also some, tactical benefits to it. Um, I guess we'll go into that. So I think I agree with you. Traditional card game logic is the less cards you have, the better chance you have of your best cards coming up. That kind of thing. I know when I played, Slay the Spire, I can't get rid of my, cards fast enough. I'm like, I don't want it's a card game. I don't want these cards. Uh, um, but I think what's really interesting about Marvel Champions is, you've got those 15 signature cards that come with the hero that you can't change, and those are really, have a huge impact on, how you're going to handle your deck size, because traditionally those 15 signature cards, they are stronger than aspect cards. They are stronger than basic cards. There are exceptions. Uh, you know,
as
if I were
I'm
to,
playing with a Hulk deck. No.
uh, there's a few Hulk, maybe, a few couple Gamma characters whose cards might not measure up compared to, Maria Hill, that kind of thing. That's we're taking extremes in general.
Yeah.
If you get a hero card coming up in your hand, you're like, whoa, I want to play this one because generally, it's better. And if you keep your deck to the minimum size, a bigger percentage of your deck is hero cards. You're getting more stronger cards more often. And I think one of the other major benefits to a smaller deck is, your upgrades and things. A lot of characters have key upgrades that make a major difference, or, even deck archetypes. There are aspect cards which are extremely good to get out early. Uncanny X-Men for a leadership deck. And you'll find those faster, and that is a huge benefit. But I think the question was, I think I went the opposite way. Why would you go to a 50 card deck?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Like I guess we're kind of talking about pros and cons of each, right?
mm,
And
mm,
if you are running Quicksilver, you need the friction resistance early because it's a completely different game. If you have friction resistance, if you have Ant-Man's helmet out early, those are different games if you can get them in that opening hand.
yeah,
And if you have a 50 card deck, you have you have less probability of drawing them into your opening hand. So
yeah.
that was kind of, I guess, my thoughts and what I was thinking about when posing the question.
Uh, I completely agree. And in the vast majority of decks, I do personally stick at 40 cards. But um, something I see from new players, which is a bit different, is more cards equals better. Why would you not have more cards? And I think we've covered a lot of that reason. In that you get your best ones, all your key ones, sooner. But they have a benefit, which of a bigger deck, which is actually pretty legitimate, especially in certain scenarios. It doesn't usually have a big impact, but when you run out of cards in your deck, you get an encounter card. The more cards you have in the deck, the less that comes up. Um, I think that's less impactful than some people who do, think about this, is because ultimately, unless you go through your deck one whole extra time because you have less cards, you're probably still going to see that encounter card at some point, right? So it's kind of it doesn't matter that much. Um,
Yeah, and
so
then the other thing that I think this would be an interesting time to talk about it is getting those cards at the beginning. So the probability of drawing a card in your opening hand can be calculated. And so people use what's called a hypogeometric calculation in order to figure out what's the probability of is drawing one or multiple cards in a opening hand. This is really helpful for cards like Magic or Lord of the Rings, where you are drawing one card a turn, and that can be a little bit different than when you're drawing up to your hand size in Marvel. So you're gonna get those cards quicker than you would in a traditional card game where you're drawing one card per turn. But like if you're looking at a 40 card deck, um, and you need one card in your opening hand of 6, you have a 15% chance of seeing that card in that opening hand based on the hypogeometric calculation. At a 50 card, you have a 12% chance. So it's a 3% delta in those, but like a 41 is like a 14.6% chance. So it's really not that much difference. And if that is worth it to not run that extra card, okay. But and again, this is just in that opening hand. This is just a conversation around, are you going to see that card in that opening hand? These are things that you need to weigh. And so there's the kind of rule of thumb that I'm kind of thinking about is if I have a 6 hand size alter ego, it's about a 3% chance delta if I have a running of 50 versus a 6 or a 40 card deck.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really good points. I do use those calculators, and I think that I use them for resources a lot. If you remember the other video, that kind of thing, and yeah, it's not a huge difference for the opening hand. That 3% doesn't sound like much. One of the ways I like to look at it, which is similar, but on the more negative side of things, is what's the worst case example? Let's say I'm playing Drax. I've got looking for I don't know how to pronounce it. Dwi Feet Mastery, DWI Feet. Somebody will correct me, and but I'm looking for my card draw card. And if I go from 40 to 50, worst case, I could have to go through 10 more cards to get there.
Yeah.
Which for Drax, who likes hero form, who that can take him a little bit of a while to get there, because that is his card draw card to get his cards. So that's the worst case. You could be adding on a couple of extra turns before you find this key upgrade or card. So that is definitely a big factor that I think in some ways matters more than the opening hand. But opening hand is very interesting. We could probably do a video on mulligans or anything.
Mulligans, yeah.
But something I like to think about and say sometimes is, even if you ditch your whole 6 starting cards and get another 6 and still don't find what you're looking for, you're now 6 cards closer to getting what you want. So, when you're thinking about these deck sizes and, can I get my good cards, if you are going to try a 50 card deck, I would even say a 40 card deck, you've got something you want, be ruthless and that will help out, tremendously. I think one of the other pros and cons is that in a 40 card deck you have less cards, and what that means is if you have combo pieces you're more likely to draw them together, and I think that's a huge benefit. If I'm running a combo deck, I'm really probably trying to keep it at 40 cards. If one of my favorites is Repurpose, and there is the legendary double, some even speak of the triple repurpose turn where your stats just keep going up and up and up, and
Legends have spoken of this for ages.
they have the ancient text. It's there are a few different things like that, and then you've got as you move into more sort of general decks, they're less punished for that. I the way I approach it is I aim for 40 most of the time. If there's like I can't quite fit everything in, and I think it really has a place because of what you said about the pace that you go for your deck in this game. You're going to see it anyway, right? It's not going to make a big difference if you can have this, extra card in there. That's fine. A lot of the time when I first test a deck, it will have 41, 43 cards, and I'll see like what I used, how it played, and then I'll start to trim things out. Um, you know, a lot of people will probably just play a deck once, But for someone who likes to, go really into decks, I'd prefer to start large and trim down than never try it in the first place. Cards can surprise you.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna ask a couple of questions that arose with what you were just talking about, and I guess like what it sounded like to me is that the lower deck size is not necessarily it can be getting those key pieces out, but it's more you would tend towards the lower deck sizes for combo heavy decks where you need multiple cards at the same time in order to pull off a combo like a repurpose or like a give me another example. I'm blanking here.
Another example of a combo. I mean, not particularly a super difficult combo, but if I'm running game time, such high value, I want to keep getting it.
Yeah.
Anything like that. Yeah.
Okay. And then with the on the other end for these cards that you need to get out turn one, deplete, mastery, etc., etc. Um, are you still running lower card deck sizes at like 40 in order to hit those, or is that less of a concern than the combo pieces for you?
I would say it depends on the character and the card. Taking Drax as the example, I am running 40 cards for him no matter what.
Yep. Okay.
I'm probably even putting in one of my favorite cards, assess the situation, just to keep digging in deeper. So if you guys have watched our other videos, that card is very good for, just, okay, I'll pass on a card this turn, get it next turn. You've maintained the value, but now you're one card further into your deck as well. So,
Okay.
you're almost running a 37, card size deck, almost, not quite, but
Which is why we were talking about how spiritual meditation is so good because you get to see more cards and choose. But okay, so I guess that poses an interesting question that I'd be interested to. I just said interested a lot. That poses a question that I'd be interested to dive into a little bit more, and that is, are there heroes other than Drax that you are kind of strictly running a 40 card deck? Because there is that key card that if you don't get it, it completely changes the game for you. Or it's necessary to try and get that as early as possible.
I think Drax is the key one, but I think Penny Parker would
Mhm.
be another great example because I want those interfaces. I am desperate for those
Yeah.
interfaces. I actually also play Iron Man the same way because I just want to maximize getting as much tech as possible. I just, as greedy as possible. I want that tech, and nothing is going to get in my way. I think other characters that come like that would be kind of Colossus in a way. I think Iron Will is
Yeah.
you can play him well without it, but it's so instrumental. You can get some crazy turns. In a way, I'm not so strict on it, but I think Ironheart benefits from it a lot. I think getting her cards that get her counters sooner. Just
Yep.
if you see one turn earlier, you might be able to level up one turn earlier, which might ready you up. That can make significant differences. In difficult games where it comes down to the wire, those are the kind of little things which if you can clear one encounter card one turn sooner, a lot of things get better for you. Maybe you win the game with one HP left, or a
Right.
couple of threat on the main scheme. So I think those spring to mind. There might be a couple of others. I think Ant-Man with his helmet is another interesting one. I'm not as important, but still very, very important. So yeah.
And I think like Ant-Man and his helmet, Quicksilver with his friction
Mm.
resistance are, and I guess and to some extent Nova with Unleash the Nova Force, which is not an upgrade, but it's a card that you're playing multiple times. Those to me feel more around the deck build. And so if you have Ant-Man who is constantly trying to flip, which I think a lot of Ant-Man decks do, the helmet provides a significant value. Whereas like if you're running a Quicksilver aggression with Yarn and you want to, combo that friction resistance and Yarn, that is a combo that you want to get out onto the table very, very quickly. But if not, I mean, still friction resistance is something that you want to prioritize getting onto the table. But if you have other ways to generate your resources is not as important. But so it also can come down to the deck build that you are running and the strategy that you're implementing into your game. That's really
Yes.
interesting.
Hmm. Um, I will say I've sort of been skirting around the biggest reason, or one of the biggest reasons I see to run a 50 card deck. I've sort of, I've been avoiding it because I think the other points, are really important to talk about before we get into this. But my biggest reason for running a 50 card deck is actually because I don't want to see my hero events. My hero
Mm,
cards. Hero cards tend to be better, but as we pointed out with, say, Hulk, it is not always the case. And I think Hulk does have a few really good cards that I tend to sway toward 40 for him, but there are other characters where I'm looking at their hero cards and I'm like, I would much rather have these aspect, either these combo pieces, I'll put in more combo pieces, or, maybe the aspect cards are just better, or, um, the one example, one of my favorite ones that I started to run, plus over 40 size card size decks for a couple months after she released was Phoenix.
mm,
um, because Phoenix has some really good stuff, but until spend all your counters, until you go unleashed, a lot of your events just aren't doing much. You can spend a few resources to deal 4 damage to the villain, but the board state is still bad. You're probably not rushing the villain down because you've got free threat removal. It's one attack.
right.
Uh, a lot of her cards are, some of them are very interesting, but some of them are just very, in my opinion, kind of mediocre or expensive. And I'm often very happy to just use her, big stats. I'm very happy to use the psionic trait and those shenanigans. Her power counters. And I'd just rather do aspect things. If you run an uncanny X-Men deck and go up to 45 cards with her, I think in a lot of cases, I think your late game might be slightly weaker, but your early game will be stronger because you're not
Mm,
stuck, with so many of the restrained cards. And if you draw a card of 5 Phoenix cards, if you were to go and look at her card list right now, pick out the worst cards you could have in a hero hand while you're restrained. Uh, you might think, okay, I want to, reduce the chance of this happening, and I've started to really enjoy that with Phoenix. Yeah.
that's really interesting. I like that. Are there any other heroes that outside of Phoenix that you have kind of tended towards running a higher deck size with? Maybe not for the same reason, but also like,
Mm.
is there anyone out there?
Well, I'll just say very briefly for a similar reason. The reason I have released just recently the Star-Lord 50 card deck is because a lot of his events are combo pieces you want to end the game with. Again, you might not want those early. So by going over 40, over 50 would be something. By going over 40, you're going to see, stuff like, sliding shot, less on turn one. You might not see daring escape just, on turn two. And if you're playing a rush deck, maybe you want that. But, if
Yeah.
you're not playing a rush deck, you probably don't. A very different character with a different reason to do so. Um, rather than not wanting to see your hero cards would be sort of what I alluded to, and seeing more combo pieces. I can think of two characters that, one character I think is actually quite heavily rewarded for it. Another one, it's kind of, you could debate it, but I think it's pretty good. So the first one would be Adam Warlock.
Mm,
And Adam Warlock's really interesting because his hero ability wants an aspect card to, I think you discard it or spend it, I can't quite remember. And then it does something, right? And if you don't draw any aspect cards, you got all hero or basic, suddenly your ability is offline. And turn one, that's not a big deal. But once you have what's it called, Mystic Senses out,
yeah.
you get card draw from it, and it's better than even the Sorcerer Supreme because it doesn't matter what form you start in. So it's increasing your effective hand size in whatever form because you can just swap being hero form and then do the thing, get the cool effect, and draw a card. So something I noticed when I run 40 card Adam decks, even when I try and absolutely minimize the basic cards, I will sometimes, maybe once a game or so, I will draw only hero cards. And it might not sound like a big deal, just one turn, but with Mystic Senses, potentially I'm missing, 2 cards. And when we talk about the increase of going up to say 50 cards being like a 3% different for some of these things,
Yeah.
it's you know tempo is important. So having one turn of worse tempo can be impactful. And another part of him are his events, Cosmic Awareness and Karmic Blast. which discard, and again, you want to see aspect cards. So the bigger the percentage of your deck that has aspect cards, the more likely those cards are to do, more damage, more threat removal. So I think Adam Warlock absolutely fine to run at 40, but also absolutely fine to run at 50.
Yeah. Okay, and I guess Adam Warlock and to some extent Spider Woman as well could get a little bit forced into a higher than 40 card deck because they have the restrictions of having equal numbers of aspect cards. And so if you are running basics, just the math works out so that maybe you cannot hit that 40, you have to go to 43 because the evenness of the aspects just don't work out. And so to some extent, Adam I haven't played Spider Woman in a while, which is a shame because I love Spider Woman.
It's so
Um,
good.
she is so good. Uh, Adam, to some extent, wants to go or does go through his deck. He gets some benefit to going through his deck with Soul World and everything, but it seems to me like a less of a detriment to run over 40 cards with Adam. You know what? Actually, you know what? I think Spider Woman is also a character that probably does not get hindered too much by having, the 45, 46 deck size, just because she is able to flex into kind of what she needs, and the deck that you have built with her does not rely on a specific combo piece necessarily. I guess pheromones is always nice to see.
Yeah. I think Spider-Woman's a really good character to talk about. She's similar to Adam in some ways, but very different in other ways. Um, with Adam, he does want, he can power up his events, he can hit his hero ability more often. And Soul World, as you mentioned, is something else I didn't mention. When I play Adam Warlock, I don't know about you, but when I play Adam Warlock, I tend to have more counters on Soul World than I know what to do with.
Yeah,
So
that's
he
true.
doesn't suffer too much by having, going through his deck slightly slower.
Yeah.
Um, and also Quantum, going quite heavy on Adam here, but I'm a big fan of Adam. I'm going to support Adam. The bigger your deck is, the bigger your discard pile will be, and it will last longer until it's gone by,
Yeah.
potentially 10 extra cards. So Quantum Magic will have a bigger pool of cards for longer. Same with Make the Call, on any deck. So that can be interesting. That can add a level of consistency to decks that like to mess with the discard pile. Again, not something I'd consider a major factor, but definitely a little nice extra benefit. Spider Woman, I think, does normally go, well, not normally, but quite often go over 40. I think a lot of the time with her, you've got this really cool combo where you're combining one aspect with another aspect. But on one aspect, to get all the combo pieces you need to go to this number. And now
Yeah.
to match it in the other aspect, it's just nudged you over. It's kind of what you were saying, I think. And especially including basic cards, some of those are very good for her. The other character is a very popular deck by Journeyman 2 with Cyclops, where he has a 50 card deck size. And I think that's really cool. That kind of leans into the combo kind of centric side of it. Now, this is not the combo where you want to, if you draw the set amount of right cards in your hand. It's a combo where you want to basically use, what's the card called? The X-Men card. To me, my X-Men.
Yeah. Did you say what is this Cyclops? If you said it, I'm sorry.
Cyclops.
I
Yes.
totally
Yes.
missed it. I may have zoned
Yes.
out for a second. Okay, so Cyclops. Okay, yes, I know this deck. Sorry.
I think it's called 50 Shades of Cyclops or something. I'm sure we can link it somewhere.
Yeah. I'll link it down below.
And he uses, to me, my X-Men. And, the more X-Men you put in your deck, the higher percentage chance you have of pulling an X-Men with that card, which is kind of another cool use. So, anything that wants to reach into the discard pile or hit from your deck for a certain type of card, you can increase the chance, by going over 50 and putting in as many as you can.
Really interesting. Yeah. Okay, so I think, to me my X-Men kind of is a interesting bridge into the number of cards, because we want more allies when we're running To Me My X-Men, because not only do you have a higher chance of hitting them, there's a higher chance of seeing multiple allies, and then you can choose the correct one for that time. So if you play To Me My X-Men with the Cyclops and you get to see Rockslide, Polaris, and a something else that you don't want to play, and it's like, oh, I could really use a tough status card, I can put Polaris in rather than Storm or whoever. And so you have more of an option. But let's bridge into the second part of this video, which is the number of specific types of cards for your deck and what that looks like. Now, this one, I think this is not necessarily an aspect of deck building that I have thought too much about. I think this is kind of something that just either organically works or doesn't in my decks, just because it's not something that I put a lot of conscious thought into when I'm building it. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. Can you tee this one up for us?
Yeah, so when we talk about types of card in your deck, we talk about things, like we're saying with to me, my X-Men allies. How many allies should you put in a deck? How many events? How many supports? How many resources? I mean, we've gone over resources a little bit in the previous videos, um, but it's a really, really interesting balance. And I think what you're saying is right. When I started making decks, I wasn't consciously thinking about it. Sometimes I don't, really particularly think about it because you kind of have a game sense. You kind of have an idea of how these things work. If I'm, I personally build a lot of my decks on Marvel or CDB. And, if I see this resource tab is like completely empty, I've made a mistake. I'm putting in those resources. The allies are low. I'm probably adding a couple. Um, but it's also a very interesting discussion, I think, because A, there is no right answer, but B, I think every hero, every archetype, every aspect, and even combinations of different characters, say in multiplayer, I think all affect what you might want to bring.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. So we kind of talked about in the resources video, which was video 2. I think it was 2.
Sounds likely.
Sounds likely. We kind of talked about the rule of thumb of not wanting to go over more than 7 resource cards. So that would be your doubles and then power ofs and potentially more if you had. But 7 is kind of that ideal cap for a lot of heroes and a lot of deck situations. Now,
Mhm.
I think we can talk kind of in generics with the others because like you were saying, resource to me resources feels like the one that's kind of universal and can kind of work regardless of what archetype or aspect you are running. There are exceptions, right? If you're running a cost curve that's one cost pretty much the entire way, you don't want
Mhm.
to run heavy resources. But
Yes.
um, in generic terms, let's just start with allies. Let's talk about allies. Let's kind of have a discussion around how many allies we want in our deck because I think that one is probably the most simple and most well-rounded, especially when we're talking about solo. Now, I think it can change in multiplayer, but it's really hard to run a deck with 0 allies in solo, and it's you probably don't want to run a deck with 20 allies in solo, right? Because you're locked out. You have 3 slots, potentially up to 6, I guess, or I guess 7 is the theoretical maximum, but whatever. But that one has at least some sort of game mechanic that can limit it. So let's start with allies. What are our thoughts around how many allies we should include in a deck? And then we can kind of talk about some exceptions in archetypes slash heroes here in a sec.
Yeah, so allies is really interesting. I'm just going to back it up very briefly and say, putting resources aside, the way I break down the card types is I kind of lump upgrades and supports together.
Yeah.
If you've ever watched me here before, if I'm like, is it an upgrade? Is it support? To me, it's an asset.
Yep.
So,
Does
um,
it take up a hand
and
slot or a
mm,
body slot?
yes, if it's an upgrade or support, to me, that is what I call a slow card. Or probably, do almost nothing, a little something for you on the first turn you play it, but it benefits you every time. It's kind of like the you're playing the long game when you're getting down the upgrades
Mm-hmm.
and supports. Uh, then you've got allies, which kind of fall in the middle, and then you've got you'll get a few uses out of them. They'll stay on the board for a while. Then you've got the events, which tend to be just immediate, and I would say the value kind of reflects that. So events probably lower value but immediate impact. Allies are kind of I'd say strong output and medium time they're out, and then upgrades are low impact but that you basically have them forever. And there are a million, but there's a lot of exceptions.
Yeah.
But that's a general rule, and that when I'm thinking about how many of these things I want in each of my deck, the most in the most basic way possible, that's the kind of the thing I'm running in my head. How much do I need to do? When do I need to do it? So allies are really interesting. They are really strong, and it's for a couple of reasons, I would say. And I'm not going to break down everything about what an ally is, but the reason you would want allies in your deck in the first place is one, they're super versatile. Almost every ally, can damage or it can, remove threats or it can block for you. That's kind of one of the only types in the game where you can take almost all of that card type and it does almost all of these things for you. uh, it's strong. It's very good. Um, the second reason, sort of just touched on it, but allies can block for you. They are one of the ways that all the aspects can defend themselves really effectively, very cost efficient. Going into protection or stuns or something like that, or having a particular hero that suits it. Um, when you weigh up the costs of defending, healing, that kind of thing, just having an ally down to 1 HP and blocking with it, you kind of it's a good deal, and you're kind of balancing. Okay, allies are going to cover a lot of my defense in solo, and they're very versatile. But I've got that ally slot limit, and I think that's where the tension lies. Um, and I would honestly say if you're building for power for the stronger decks, I mean, I think if you're hitting 7 or 8 allies, I think that's kind of a sweet spot.
Okay.
I think sometimes you're like, I want to put all these cool combo cards in, but I think allies are so good. They're very versatile. They give you that consistency. And if the villain pulls out that assault card, I'm getting attacked again, you've got the ally there to save you.
Good thing we got
Mm,
Ironheart here.
mm. I think I would say maybe like 3 or 4 is kind of like a minimum. And especially if you're just new to the game, you don't have that many, if you just have the core box, you are probably running, maybe 4, I can't remember how many come, 4 or 5 allies is probably your maximum anyway. But if you're struggling with a villain, I would, encourage you to push that up to around 7 or 8.
Yeah. Okay. And so, two things. I'm going to start with the one which I think is a really fun parallel to our first video around the cost curve, which was
Mm,
we want to flatten out the cost curve. And so, we want to do that so that we have flexibility in our options. So, if we have lower cost cards as well as higher cost cards, we can choose what we want to do, and we can play a lot of low cost or the high cost, but we have the flexibility in our hand. When you're talking about the it's almost like a distribution curve of upgrade, or what you call like long or slow benefits, quick benefit with the events, and also the medium benefit with allies. It
mm,
almost seems like we want to smooth that curve out as well, because we need late game, we need immediate, I need to take care of this minion in front of me. I have a Sentinel Mark 8. He needs to go away. And events are going to be the most efficient way to do that quickly, whereas we also need the long term. And so it's almost like a smoothing of that curve where allies can kind of help with both of those, kind of help that smooth. And so I think that was like, when you were talking about that, my mind immediately went back to that first like lesson that you taught me of smoothing out the deck. And so it's almost like, it's not necessarily a number, you need this many. It's you need the flexibility in order to have the options for the late game. And again, like rush is an exception, but on a general thought standpoint, smoothing that out is really interesting.
yeah. No, I think that was 100% what I'd say it is. And certain decks, like rush decks, I think they're completely legitimate. They are going to want more direct impact, less long term. They're not going to want this upgrade that's going to pay off in 10 turns. I mean, most people don't want a 10 turn, payoff. But someone that pays off in 5 turns if they want to win in, the next turn after that. And then there are, decks in between rush and the slower decks. There's kind of a spectrum of where the speed falls, and that might influence what you want. But I'd say for a general deck, especially if you're starting out, if you balance things out, you're going to be in for a good time. Um, you know, one of the advantages of allies are that an encounter card comes up. Well, I can use my ally to maybe it can remove the side scheme or it can hit the minion.
Right.
That's something an event can't do. Once you played the event, there are probably exceptions, but most of them aren't going to benefit you the next turn. So you don't, even if the event does have better value, if you math out the damage per cost, the ally's going to be flexible between turns. You put it where you need, and I think that's really important. So getting that balance, like a different example would be upgrade versus an event. I could have an upgrade that I can exhaust once a turn. Maybe it will do a couple of damage, but if I've got a big minion out, maybe it's got 3 attack stat, it could take me 3 or 4 turns to hit it for this 2 damage each. Meanwhile, it's hitting me for 3 damage every turn, and now I'm dead. So
Right.
the event might do 5 damage for, let's just say for argument's sake, 5 damage for 5 resources, whereas the upgrade is 1 cost and then it's doing a damage every single turn. But I want to play the event because otherwise I'm gonna get destroyed
Right.
before it pays
Right.
off.
It may not be cost effective, but it is flexible and get you what you need at
Mm,
that time. Which
yes.
flexibility is, I guess, the next thing or the next question that I have for you. When we're talking about allies and them being so very strong because they are flexible, does the value of an ally diminish with more players in the game. So as we're starting to fill more roles in the game, we have the protector, we have the person managing threat. Now allies don't really, I get this is me asking the question, do allies need to be there as frequently because you have someone that can protect you, you have someone that can manage the threat? The flexibility, the benefit of the flexibility, does that go away, or are we running less allies when we're running 4 players? Or thoughts around that?
I think that's a great question. I would say yes. Now, I wouldn't say the value, goes away, but definitely, if I'm running an aggression deck, but I'm in multiplayer and my protection player is like, oh, I'm Ghost Spider, no one's ever taking damage, and I'm like, yes, yes, okay, goodbye allies, hello, more damage cards or more combo pieces. But I don't think you want to do away with allies entirely. You could definitely, I said in terms of power, definitely solo. I think 728 is quite a nice. Honestly, you could go higher, but then your deck starts to become allies, just a mash of allies. But when you get to multiplayer, you can start to tone that down. You still like the versatility. What if that player, gets the obligation? Oh no, now they're in the wrong form, and the villain's putting an attack out. Where's my defense? I think one of the advantages of 4 player is that even though everyone can have their own, specific role, and you don't no longer need the versatility too much, people can have worse turns. And now you've got 4 players being versatile and able to help each other out. So I would never say, unless you're doing it kind of for the sake of variety and novelty, get rid of all your allies. Definitely, if you're like, oh, I wish I could fit in, this extra upgrade, this extra event, you can. I mean, unless you're leadership, because you love allies, you can kick that out. And this is probably a really good point to specify. When I've been talking about 4 to 8 allies, I'm talking about a 40 size deck, and I'm actually mostly talking about aggression, justice, and protection decks that aren't based around defending a lot. Because I think the different aspects affect things differently. So I'll just quickly say leadership is going to want more. In leadership, I'm running anywhere from 9 to 12, sometimes more. Not normally, but what I would say is a card like Make the Call or something that recurs an ally, you can always count as an ally because it's effectively result is an ally. And then in protection, if I'm defending all the time, then one of the most valuable points of allies we talked about was defending. I'm not going to need as much defense because I want to defend it. I want to trigger unflappable. I want to do all that good stuff.
Yeah, you like what we were saying in that previous video. That first defense is super valuable, so you want to take it. But the allies are still valuable if you draw that assault, you draw that gang up. You have a Sentinel Mark 8 that's going to hit you for 3, 4, 5, and stun. It can be, again, flexible. And so, okay, so we have rule of thumb, let's say 7 allies, 7 resources, 15 signature cards. That's 29 cards. Are we splitting the remaining 11 cards fairly evenly between events and asset cards, the support upgrades? Or is that deck specific, or what's a rule of thumb around that?
I mean, everything is deck specific. I mean, even with resources, I'd say my average deck has 5, right?
Yeah.
So if I go up to 7, something else comes down. My allies again, if I go up to 8, something else probably has to come down a bit. So it is flexible and deck dependent, and I don't think you could specifically pin it in any one certain way because even within aspects, I think they change a lot. I think the most flexible one is events. Leadership will maybe have more allies. Protection tends to have more upgrades, but can have a lot of events. But events, you need that immediate impact. So it really depends how it's going. So if I'm protection, maybe let's say solo, I'm not going to need a lot of defensive events because I'm only probably defending once on most turns. So in solo protection, in traditional decks, I'm running less events. So I'll go toward the smaller, and then I'll probably have more upgrades and supports instead.
Okay.
There's no clear answer, I'm afraid.
Yeah. And so I guess, like, let me rephrase the question. Now I'm frantically trying to pull up, but I am logged out of Marvel CDB on my laptop, so I can't look at specific cards. Oh, here we go. Perfect. So what about... Yes, okay. I just wanted to think about this before I actually said it and made a claim. What about characters like Gamora, who are very, very heavy into events with their signature kit? Are you looking to typically add more upgrades to balance that out? Or Gamora likes to play those events, so are you leaning into events? And maybe Gamora, because she likes to play those events so much, is not necessarily the best or best question, but if a hero has more events or more upgrades, are you looking to offset that? And maybe this is also different in a multi and a solo player deck build.
That's a really good question as well. It depends, I would say, on the hero and deck build a lot. So for if I put Gamora aside for a second, in a general deck, I am looking to, kind of even things out. So I'm looking for, I would say is a very average amount of events might be 17, 18. An average amount of upgrades or supports might be around 10. Then your allies, it'll be maybe 6. Resources be maybe 5. Then with your signature cards, I've not done the math, but that's probably going to get you to 40.
Yeah.
Then you got characters like Gamora who like events. Miss Marvel loves events. Um, those characters, even though Gamora especially, I think, comes with a lot of events in her deck, because she likes them, you might actually lean into them even more, even though she has them. So there isn't a hard and fast rule for everything. In general, if you're just starting out, I would say kind of go for a balance. Events 14 to 21, you can flex it wherever you need. Upgrades, supports 7 to 13 combined. Those are how I'd hit those kind of numbers. But there's nothing wrong if you have 14 events compared to 21. And this is just really hitting the general numbers, because you can run a good deck that only has one ally, or you can hit a great event where you don't add a single event. So this is all from my coming from me is hopeful advice to some people would just be take all these numbers as guidelines, but feel free to break all the rules and see what works or see what other people have done.
And we had said it in a previous video, but deck testing and deck manipulation after playing, because there are so many decks that I most of my deck builds I put together on the fly, right? I'm doing it live stream. I'm just building a deck, and a lot of them I'm like, yep, that could be better, right? And so and it's just like it looks good on the table. It's like, oh, this should all work out. It's like I didn't have any allies to block for me. I died very quickly. And so repeat, change, repeat, change, repeat, change, and you will get to better decks. But this is, I think, a really good, what you were saying, those guidelines of starting and trying to figure out and manipulate, especially like if you're coming at it for like a new hero or something like that, because there are some weird, wacky combinations that you don't necessarily get to see until you put them on the table and play.
Yeah, no, absolutely. For example, I think what big exception I can think of is Rogue, who I think she comes with 2 upgrades, and one is just set aside all the time, and everything else is like events, and then your one signature ally, you know. So for her, I see decks for her quite often go quite high in events just because she starts with so many. But at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, I'm personally quite a lot of the time looking to put in, more allies, more upgrades, because she has those events and they are really good. So see what works, give it a try and reiterate. And the more you do this, the more you start to deck build, the more you will see it. I'm sure, Nelson, if you think back to when you first started making decks compared to now, I imagine you can probably see you've probably, found a lot of improvement.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
I win games now.
what? That's crazy.
I know. I I know it's crazy. I'll be here all week, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's definitely a iterative process, and it's something that practice does. I'm not gonna say make perfect, but practice definitely helps, because it's there's so many levers you can pull. It's so complex, and that's why we're on video 5, and we have more planned for this deck building series in this Marvel Champions deck building series. And so, I guess like, are there any exceptions? We kind of talked about them, but like, what are this is video 5. I know you have some caveats that you want to bring up, so let's talk about those.
I mean, there are always caveats. There are always, always exceptions. And I don't even know if I should bring them up because there are
Okay.
so many. But kind of what I'm saying, certain archetypes, archetypes even within aspects differ. I'd say there's a general rule for aspects. I talked about leadership likes more allies, protection tends to trend toward less. Um, and that still goes for multiplayer, even though things do change a bit. But even within the aspects, so in leadership, there's an archetype called Voltron. sometimes you have one or two key allies, and you're just upgrading those, and you're running maybe a hero who can handle the defense themselves. So I'm spoiler alert, I'm working on a deck that has one ally added to it, and
Ooh.
it could maybe be slightly stronger if I was to add one or two more to it. Goes slightly against the theme, but you can run low ally decks, and
Mm.
then your combos are hitting harder. You're getting your upgrades sooner. That's really interesting things you can do there, and very fun way to play. And it's kind of slightly off topic quickly, but a lot of the things I'm talking about here are generally in terms of building for power. You're a hero, you want to beat the villain, but I think there's a lot of merit in variety and fun. So
Yeah.
you can just change things up, kind of like this deck I'm talking about. You can just have one ally or no allies. You can do that and see how it goes. Sometimes it's fun to challenge yourself and push decks in interesting directions and see if you can make it across the finish line. Um, I think, upgrades and supports, if you're running Rush, you run less. Certain heroes don't really need them that much. I would point to Miles Morales. His events are so good. Sometimes the value is so high. I'm like, I don't want to put an upgrade out because I just want to get the immediate value. It's not to say don't run upgrades on him, but less inclined. And again, I think hand size is massively important when we kind of for all these things. A little bit when we talked about resources, the more cards you have, the more places you're going to find to put those resources, but also the more opportunities you're going to have to find the keys to the locks, like the solutions to the problems that the villain, the scenario has presented to you. So again, like we said about in the resource video, if you have bigger hand size, you can go heavier on the resources. And it's a little bit with the other ones as well. I'm okay to run a couple of extra upgrades if I know if I need an event, I've got a high chance of hitting an event because of my hand size.
Gotcha. I guess last question that I have, and we may have more, but the last question that I currently have, I should say, is for the longer games, and I'm typically thinking about like multiplayer here, and maybe like if someone wanted to take on Thanos, right? Like a lot of health is going to be a longer game. Is there merit in running higher amounts of not allies, upgrades or supports if you have better hero events, knowing that you're thinning your deck down and you can hit those more frequently?
Yes, deck thinning is a really good topic. Probably do a whole video on that. But yeah, no, I think that's 100% a really good point. If you know the game is going to go on longer, and I would point to probably Loki is probably like the longest scenario.
Yeah.
Expert Loki, you have to defeat 3 Lokis. It's like that's 60 health in solo.
It's too much.
It's it's definitely an epic. We'll call it that. I think more cards, like what upgrades that are going to benefit you in the longer term. Certainly, if I'm up against Magog, I think it's one of the shorter scenarios. Really fun though. I'm running, the opposite. I'm running less upgrades because I'm just not going to get so many chances to use them. And deck fitting is another excellent point. I could point to, I think Voltron builds do this quite well since we were talking about them. And to explain, if you've not heard, Voltron deck is, an ally you stack upgrades on. Since you're putting a lot of upgrades onto the board, through them, and you want to keep them around, you've got less cards left when your deck is cycling, between the discard pile. And that is honestly really valuable. You'll notice cards like Deft Focus, specific, resource generators, or even other cards that target specific card types. If you remove the other cards, they're gonna hit more, and that is really valuable. Again, faster decks or faster, shorter scenarios, not going to matter as much. But the longer ones, your deck can power up and up and up. And I don't know if this has ever happened to anybody, but I know one of the first times I fought Thanos, I was playing Scarlet Witch. He snapped my deck. I lost half my deck, but I kept all 4 hex bolts.
Nice.
And he had a bad time.
Yeah. 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 So yeah, that's the extreme of deck thinning. It's like, okay, if you can hit those 4 hex bolts multiple times in a situation like Thanos where it does it, but also just like in a let's throw all the upgrades on the table. Yeah, okay, cool. And I like, again, it's flexibility, it's tempo, it's all thinking about, okay, am I going slow, am I going fast, but it's also smoothing out the curve and understanding exactly what you're going up against and what your hero needs. And I think we just keep coming back to test and It depends.
Yes, Tess, and it depends. We don't need these long videos. We could have just said that.
Yeah, there you go.
Ah,
Oh my goodness.
I
Okay.
think I think one.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
going to
yeah.
interrupt you. I
No, no,
think sorry. I
yeah.
think just one one other thing that came to mind. There are characters, whose hero kits naturally thin their deck, um, and those characters can be really good if you're running a combo deck like Repurpose, or Hone Technique where with no quarter. So those are decks where, let's say I'm running Miss Marvel, I'm playing all my Persona supports, that kind of thing, Shrink, Embiggen, uh, and now I've got less cards in my deck. So
Yeah.
next time through my deck, I've got more chances to get repurposed. More tech is coming up. Or if I'm running honed technique and no quarter, what no quarter does is for every point of excess damage it does, you discard from your deck and draw an aggression card. Well, if I've got rid of my signature cards because they're on the board, I've got more aspect cards in there. You just start to draw more and more profit from that kind of thing. So it's a little bit advanced, probably in some cases, but it's also still very relevant, and a lot of decks will work better because of that. And if you start a deck and it feels wobbly, then suddenly all your cards are lining up later. See how many upgrades and stuff you've got out, because probably you've thinned it out.
Yeah. Very, very cool. Okay, so I think that's going to do it for this video, unless we have any more topics that we want to touch on real quick. But thank you so very much, Villain Theory, for coming on, helping us understand if we want to run 40 or 50 card decks, and then also how many of those are those decks we want to, or how many of those cards we want to run in our decks. If you want to find any of the Villain Theory's links, you can find them below. But before we sign off, can you tell everybody where they can find you?
Yes, I am mostly known for my decks on Marvel CDB. Same name as you see here, VillainTheory. They are around. You can search by username, and we'll have links below, as said. Sometimes I like to post little articles on Reddit or here and there. And yeah, you'll find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so very much, Villain Theory, and I look forward to our next one. Peace.
Yep. See ya. Bye.